From September 11th to the Great Recession, from Katrina to government shutdowns, small businesses have been battling stresses and shocks. Through grit to innovation, they have sustained local economies with their resilience. Now, they face an unprecedented threat, COVID-19. As Congress scrambles to provide aid, coronavirus economic relief packages are overlooking millions of micro businesses. Many of these businesses are owned by people of color, veterans, immigrants, and others who operate in low and moderate income communities. During the best of times, they face hardships in gaining access to the resources needed to thrive, grow, and hire. Their remarkable innovation to provide economic freedom for their families is on full display. What will you do to support the heartbeat of the nation's economy?
Good morning and welcome to day two of the AEO very special 2020 National Conference. And thank you for having AEO into your home. Nearly a year ago, when we selected our theme, Resilient, Small Businesses Strengthening Local Economies, little did we know the extreme relevance that line would take on. But here we are in the midst of a coronavirus pandemic. Resilient indeed. Yesterday, we heard three inspirational businessmen who shared their story and wisdom on being resilient. Stephanie, Sylvia, and Rhonda told us how they studied their minds, took care of their employees, pivoted their business models, and implemented plans to stay resilient. They gave us all good lessons and insights on how to weather challenging times. They affirmed my opening that more than ever, these businesses are lifelines, especially in places hit hardest by the pandemic. Small businesses owned by entrepreneurs of color are providing essential supplies and face near extinction. What our industry and AEO members and partners have always known, regardless of where you look, has now been shown to the rest of America. Main Street, micro, and small businesses are essential to our local communities and the heartbeat of the nation. If there was ever any doubt of the lifeblood relationship between Black and Brown-owned businesses and the people and neighborhoods they serve, it's impossible to miss that reality now. At AEO, we mobilized our efforts to craft an experience that encompasses some of the traditional elements of the AEO conference. After all, it is our 27th conference, but it's relevant to the current climate and needs of the AEO community. In the new format, you will have opportunities to engage each other and interact with compelling content in an interactive format. Here are a few features you can look forward to. Opportunities to attend a virtual series, a few hours each through June 25th. It combines a live town hall, virtual coffee break, compelling stories from Main Street business owners, giveaways, and networking with colleagues during a virtual happy hour. A knowledge center with resources and ways for you to watch at your own pace if unable to attend each live session. For those of you who are joining us for the first time today, you can see all of the outstanding sessions from yesterday, plus messages from our sponsors at our conference site by going to www.aeoworks.org. A digital community that will allow attendees to discover and share new insights with uploaded videos and AEO signature TIM Talks. TIM stands for Transformation in Microfinance. Think of TIM Talks as AEO's version of TED Talks. We offer a dynamic platform for our audience here from a diverse group of speakers. We have nearly 90 speakers coming to you over this event, including award-winning journalist Roland Martin, Philadelphia. By the way, I mentioned giveaways. Be sure to pay attention to the chat. That is how we will announce the giveaway. We could not have done any of this without our sponsors. As you view them on the screen, please join me in thanking them for their generosity, which allowed us to produce this event for free admission. We are indeed grateful. Ending yesterday with the three women entrepreneurs, Stephanie, Sylvia, and Rhonda, I keep repeating their names. I want them to know that we see them, we value them, we support them. Ending yesterday with these three women provides a great transition for today's session, where we will focus on women, wealth, and entrepreneurship. You know, I have heard several countries say that we are in a she session, meaning women are the hardest hit in this COVID-19 recession. But we will give you the facts on the gendered impact of COVID-19. Then a panel of very accomplished women entrepreneurs and leaders will discuss the female paradox. You know, a paradox is that seemingly absurd or self-contradicting statement. What's absurd, you might ask? How is it that women start businesses at a rate that has been on the rise in the United States for the last 2 decades? From 1997 to 2017, the number of women-owned businesses grew by 114%. The rate for Black women business startups is more than triple that rate. Even though the number of women-owned businesses is on the rise, women business owners still face an uphill battle. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, the World Economic Forum projected that at the current rate of women's progress, it would take 208 years to reach gender equality in the US. How is that possible? How can we hold both of those positions? We're starting more businesses than anyone else, yet it will take 208 years to reach gender equality? This is a true paradox. Although our own research at AEO shows that business owners hold twice the wealth of non-business owners, it's not necessarily so when we look at some women starting from income. Of course, we could not have a discussion about women entrepreneurship without talking about the constant uphill struggle battle for women. In closing this segment on women, we will examine capital access and what's in store for women in COVID-19 infused recession. I found a few quotes about women that I would like to leave you with before I turn the morning over to an array of amazing speakers, just for you to ponder. Women are like eBay. We don't know our true strength until we're empowered. A strong woman looks a challenge dead in the eye and gives it a wink. Some women are lost in fire. Some women. And my last quote I will share: mirror, mirror on the wall, I'll always get up after I fall. And whether I run, walk, or have to crawl, I'll set my goals and achieve them all. I'm so glad you're with us. Joining us next with our first AEO signature Tim Talk of the day is Dr. Steve Nicole Mason. Joy.
Good morning. And before I get started, I want to thank AEO for the invitation to speak with you today. My name is Nicole Mason, and I lead the Institute for Women's Policy Research. For those of you who may not be familiar with our work, the Institute for Women's Policy Research is the nation's preeminent think tank committed to achieving economic equity for women and eliminating structural and institutional barriers to women's full participation in the workforce and society. IWPR's mission is to build evidence and knowledge to support policies that help grow women's economic power and influence in society, close inequality gaps, and improve the economic security and well-being of girls, women, and families. We generate the ideas that build economic equity for all women. I don't take for granted this platform to speak to you today. It's truly an honor and privilege. In this current economic, social, and political moment, there is so much uncertainty, shifts, and upheaval, or when there's so much noise and the truth of our daily lives can be made hidden or invisible. I feel very fortunate to spend time with you, not only articulating the impact of COVID-19 on working women, their families, and communities, but offering us a way forward. There is an urgency to this extraordinary moment that cannot be denied. The decisions we make now about how to engage with others and how we show up with the moral courage to support and protect and provide for those with less power, privilege, or ability will determine our future and whether we become further disconnected or fully realize our shared humanity. I, like many of you, are or have been entrepreneurs, or you have friends or loved ones who have started their own businesses. I became an entrepreneur running my own consulting firm when, as a single mother to a set of twins, could not be a full-time mom and also a full-time employee to a company, who did not fully appreciate I was juggling to make ends meet. From that point, it would take another 7 years when my children were 10 years old before I would return to full-time work for an organization, the one I currently lead. There are a myriad of reasons why women become entrepreneurs: big dreams, wage inequality, discrimination and harassment in the workplace. They see it as a pathway to wealth, a great idea, or family. Sometimes it's one of these reasons, and at other times it could be all of them. Sometimes becoming an entrepreneur can feel like a constrained choice, a choice that's really not a choice but made out of survival. And other times it can feel like freedom. At the start of the year, we were celebrating the gains made by women in the workforce. At the time, women made up 51% of the labor force. The booming economy that we were simultaneously celebrating was made possible in part by women entrepreneurs. At the time, I cautioned against a full embrace or celebration. I understood that what the numbers masked was a struggle that many working women faced to make ends meet or to take care of their families. Although at the time, women constituted 51% of the workforce, they were also more likely to be employed in lower wage jobs, have fewer benefits, less job security, and to be economically vulnerable. They also struggle with childcare and other caretaking demands. In other words, all was not what it seemed. During this time, there was also a celebration of women entrepreneurs. Over the last 2 decades, women's owned businesses have increased by 114%, and women of color owned businesses have increased by 467%, particularly among Black women. What is discussed less frequently is the difficulty of attracting capital for their businesses. Less than 0.04% of capital dollars go to women. The unbanked businesses that can't access credit for credit necessary to grow their businesses. What does this mean during COVID-19? It means plenty. The pandemic has exposed the fragility of our economy, the vulnerability of women workers and entrepreneurs, and the lack of systems and supports to help women ride out an economic downturn. So much has changed over such a short period of time. Over the last couple of months, the economy has shed more than 30 million jobs, and women have bore a disproportionate amount of those losses at more than 70%. Nearly 4 in 10 women's jobs have been adversely affected by the pandemic. The chief reason for this is that women are more likely to be employed in most impacted sectors, such as education, healthcare, hospitality, and leisure. I believe this number is significantly higher because we have not or do not account for women who are employed in the shadow economy or get paid under the table. There's a definite rippling effect. And as we know, many women and many entrepreneurs make up 50% of part-time workers. In February, the unemployment rate for women was around 4%. It's now 15.7%. For Black and Latino women, the numbers are slightly higher at 16.7% and 18.9% respectively. For workers with less than a high school education, the unemployment rate is a whopping 21%. This is disastrous for many of the reasons I mentioned a bit ago. Despite gains in the workforce, women are still likely to earn less or to be in lower wage jobs with few benefits and job security, meaning that they have less money to save to ride out an economic downturn or recession. They also have less job security and flexibility. With schools out and daycares closed, many working mothers face a tough choice: provide for their families or take care of them. For many, it's an impossible choice. Many women are also primary breadwinners in their families, meaning that they contribute 40% or more of their income to their households. In families with children, 91.3% of parents work outside of the home. And 1 in 2 of more than 30 million families in the US with children under the age of 18 have a breadwinner mother. Black and Latino women are also more likely to be sole wage earners in their families than other groups of women. Long gone are the days where women's income accounted for a minor share of household income and workforce participation was optional. This is never the case for Black and Latino women whose income has consistently made up a considerable portion of their household incomes. During a pandemic, what this means is that there are many single mother-headed households without an income or the ability to meet their family's basic needs. And for the women who have worked more than 2 jobs or a side job to make ends meet or started a business, those sources of revenue have all but disappeared. Before I turn to a way forward, I want to spend some time in consideration of the impact of the pandemic on women entrepreneurs. When the Paycheck Protection Program was introduced in Congress, it felt like a lifeline to many entrepreneurs who saw profits, bookings, speaking engagements, and events evaporate. This program, I believed, was meant for small businesses that would help to keep them afloat. Friends of mine who were entrepreneurs rushed to line only to discover a few things. Because they didn't have a business account, they would be shut out of the program before it had even launched. Being unbanked is not a business decision. It happens because of institutional racism and because of the refusal of banks to extend credit to minority-owned businesses, small businesses. In fact, as a result of some of these institutional and structural barriers, only 12% of Black and Latino business owners who applied for the Paycheck Protection programs reported receiving what they asked. Nearly half of these Black and Latino businesses owners say they anticipate being forced to close permanently in the near future. What made matters worse for these small businesses, and I think for me and many people across the country, was to see the large companies that had walked away with huge loans that arguably they did not need to stay afloat, and the banks that prioritized these companies ahead of struggling small business owners. In the childcare sector, for example, many providers said they cannot survive more than 2 weeks without income from their families. And it's been more than 2 months, and many of these small businesses, small women-owned businesses, have closed their doors, and some will not reopen. And I believe that as we begin to recover, this will be the case for many small businesses as well. When the stay-at-home orders are lifted, and when the economy begins to recover, recovery will be slow. There will not be a one-for-one replacement for the jobs that were lost. Some businesses will not reopen. Many of those businesses will be minority-owned, women-owned, immigrant-owned, and in communities that need services and products the most. And if stay-at-home orders are lifted and the daycares are closed, slots have disappeared, and the summer camps are closed, women workers may not be able to re-enter the workforce in the numbers in pre-pandemic numbers. So what should we do? Well, the good news is that we're doing some of the things that can and should be done. As a result of the pandemic and relief efforts in the CARE Act, we've provided federal paid sick leave to workers, made unemployment insurance more expansive, including workers that were previously excluded, made provisions for caregivers who cannot return because of caretaking demands. We also provided basic income to most Americans. We also pumped money into a program for small business owners. In the states, we've provided housing and food assistance, not only to those severely below the poverty line, but for all those that can demonstrate need. We're doing it now. All the things that we said were impossible just a few months ago, we're doing it now. So I believe we should institutionalize many of these programs. The other thing I think we can do is to think about employer-led practices that can support women in the workforce and entrepreneurs. Flexible work schedules, childcare subsidies and support, paid sick leave are just a few of the workplace policies that will go a long way to ensuring that women not only enter the workforce, but are able to stay. For women-owned businesses and entrepreneurs, there is definitely a need for targeted programs and supports for workers, and also providing an infusion of cash to make sure that their workers who depend on them can also stay and remain employed by providing, again, childcare supports and federal subsidies for paid sick leave at the state and federal levels. Lastly, I want to talk a little bit or interrogate the broken system that denies capital to some small businesses while lavishing it on others. Let's invest in women workers and entrepreneurs and clear the path for their success and career advancement. I've been a part of many conversations about the struggles that many small businesses and women-owned businesses face, particularly those of color. It doesn't have to be this way. We can provide supports and policies and hold banks and businesses accountable for not supporting or providing capital to small and minority-owned businesses and communities. As far as I can see, there are two paths. There's two paths to recovery. The first path is rooted in fear and scarcity, going back to the way things were and using the economic downturn as an excuse to regress or to not do what's right by small business owners and women workers. The second path, which is the one I believe that we're on and that we should remain on, is one of progress, expansion, and reimagining systems, institutions, and an economy that works for everyone, and a recovery that is even. There is so much work ahead of us and so much that we can do to make sure that many of the businesses that are struggling to stay afloat, not only stay afloat, but come out on the other side stronger than ever. We are in this moment, and we have a really great opportunity, but also responsibility to make sure that the recovery is even. All we have to do is keep moving ahead and moving forward and making sure that the most vulnerable in our society, including small businesses, are provided the resources they need to, again, recover successfully. Thank you so much.
Welcome to day 2. Hi, I'm Corey Briscoe, and we are elated to have you here at AEO's 2020 National Conference here in Houston, Texas, or wherever you are across the country. And though we're not physically able to meet in Houston this year, as planned, I promise you that we are committed to making sure you have the full AEO conference experience. In particular, we're committed to that brand promise, ensuring that you're able to innovate faster, partner smarter, and execute better. Here are a few quick tips to make sure that you can maximize your conference experience. Number 1, registration. The only way to get access to the VIP experience is by going to aeoworks.org and selecting conferences and registering. By registering, you'll have access to polls, chats, live Q&As with our speakers, networking, virtual happy hours, and opportunities to win giveaways every week. This week, I heard we were even giving away an apple. Number 2, engage. Connect with us by going on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Engage us using the hashtag #RevitalizeMainStreet, which champions the theme that every small business matters. And lastly, connect with the conference team. We're here to help. Having technical troubles? Want to find out more information on AEO and the work that we do? Or want to connect through membership, a cohort, or something that you've heard? Send us an email at aeoconference@aeoworks.org or call the number listed below. And now let's get into the heart of discussion as we talk about women, wealth, and entrepreneurship. Our first panel is led by one of our conference co-chairs, Valerie Mosley. Join her and this amazing panel as she talks about the female paradox. Over to you, Valerie.
Hi, I'm Valerie Mosley, and I am so happy to be here with you today. We have a fantastic group of women here that I'm really excited to interview and to share with you. Earlier, you heard Connie talk about the World Economic Forum. and the estimate that it's going to take 208 years to get to equality for women. And we want to talk about how can we bend that curve and make sure that women have more economic and wealth equality much sooner. And we have the wonderful benefit of having three of some of the most dynamic women that I've met. Some I know and some I've just learned. And Nellie is having a little trouble getting in, so I think she might be there. I'm going to hear shortly. She's not in, so we're having a little trouble getting Nellie access. Let me see if I'm being told to be centered. Excuse me. But let me just tell you a little bit about her. You're going to meet her soon. Nellie Gallen. She is dubbed the tropical tycoon because she's from Cuba originally, moved to New Jersey, and she's the first Latina to ever run an entertainment division of a U.S. television show. Excuse me, a television company, Telemundo. And then she went from corporate America into becoming an entrepreneur and has a best-selling book called Self-Made. She is a self-made entrepreneur and has done quite well and has married her skills with her passion and is going around helping other entrepreneurs, other women to become entrepreneurs. And we're going to hear from her. We also have Lisa Price, who is fantastic, and she was the founder of Carol's Daughter, and in 2014 sold her company to L'Oreal. And so she's gone from being an entrepreneur to being inside of a corporation. We also have Margaret Chinua Anadu, who is partner in merchant banking and leading the Urban Investment Group. She's our capital partner. And each of these women are dynamic and successful in their own right, but they're also really good people. And you're going to feel it and sense it. So what I'd like to do is to ask these women who've been successful professionally, personally, to tell us a little bit about themselves, and in so doing, give specific thoughts and advice to how women and entrepreneurs can bend that curve so that there is much more equity. Who do we have that is available? Let's start with Lisa, because I think we're still having a little trouble with Nellie.
Me?
Are you here, Lisa? Yes. Hi, Lisa. It's so good seeing you.
Hi.
Such a pleasure. It's such a pleasure. Greetings from Martha's Vineyard. And you are such a leader. And when we spoke and got to get to know each other a little bit, you were talking about how you weren't this trust fund baby. And instead, you just had a belief in yourself. And so when I think about what bends this curve, it starts with, what do you think about you? It starts with the worth, because I see, my background is that I'm an investor. I've managed billions of dollars for years, and I see these parallels between managing money and managing life. And so I'm going to ask you questions around that. And
Okay.
it seems like it starts with you. So tell us a little bit about you and how you got started and had the courage to create this incredible business.
Well, I, in the past, have referred to myself as an accidental entrepreneur because when I started doing what I was doing, it was a hobby. It was something that brought me joy. I loved creating fragrances and figuring out how to make lotions and infusing oils with herbs and then sharing those things with friends and family. And 27 years ago, my mother encouraged me to sell, and I sold products at a flea market. And that was the beginning of me sharing in a different way this craft and this passion that I had developed. So I didn't start out thinking, I'm going to be an entrepreneur. I'm going to be a business owner. I'm going to build this brand. It was something that I learned as it developed and fleshed itself out in front of me. So now that I'm in the place that I am 27 years later, I like to use myself as an example to people, women in particular, women of color in particular, that you don't have to have the 5-year plan figured out. You don't have to know what every single next step is to begin. Now, yes, as you begin and as you progress, in order to continue to be successful, you do need to flesh those things out and have a course that you're going to follow. But it's not all figured out when you begin. A lot of it is stepping out on faith. And in our communities, we have a ton of that. We don't necessarily always apply that faith and confidence to ourselves and what we're capable of doing. And that's something that I feel I learned with entrepreneurship.
And what helped you to learn that? And because there are many people out there who want to get started and may not have that confidence and not know how to get started. So what do you tell that person, and what helped you?
What helped me was the fact that it was always very uncomfortable for me to live with what if. I preferred possibly failing to, well, what if I had? Well, what if I had said? Well, what if I had done? I didn't like living with that uncertainty. So even though I was afraid to step forward, I was more afraid of living with what if. And then each time that I would work up the courage to step out on faith and do something that I was afraid to do, when things would work out, or sometimes they didn't, but I survived. It's like exercising this muscle that you don't know is there. And each time you step out on faith, it gets a little bit easier and it gets stronger, and you realize that you can survive. It's not exactly the same, but when we think about having a profound loss in our life, if you've never lost a parent or a spouse, or God forbid, a child, you presume that that is something that you cannot live through. That is something that is not possible to survive. But obviously we all do, because at some point in our lives, we lose someone near and dear to us, and we do survive and we do move on. Thankfully, that is not a muscle that we want to exercise often. But it is similar to that, in that you don't know that it's there until you begin to flex it and use it and work it. And the more that you work it, the more you can rely on it, and you become less fearful. I don't feel after 27 years that I am fearless. I am just less fearful of a number of things. It takes a lot to make me say, I can't do this. I can't do this. And then even when I say it, I know that means that I have to.
I love that. I love that. And one of the things that, when you think about the power of compounding, you know that if you don't do anything, it's going to take a really long time to bend that arc. So you have to increase those habits and those mindsets and those actions that are like compounding interest, and reduce those actions and mindsets that are liabilities. And you just mentioned two. One is fear, and the other is not believing that you can. And so congratulations for having done that, because if we increase and compound that positive interest and that positive activity and belief and mindset, we're likely to grow faster. And if we increase those other things like fear and I can't and I'm not good enough, we won't. So you are an example of that, and I love it. Next, let's meet Margaret Anadu. Is she on?
I'm here.
Hi, Margaret. We aren't seeing you just yet. We have Margaret Anadu, self-described Texan. Hi, how are you? Great to see you. Half Texan, half Nigerian, mother of two, incredibly dynamic. The only Black partner at Goldman who grew up in the investment side, and you've turned your passions and your talents into impact. So tell us a little bit about you, and what do you think is required to help bend this arc?
Sure. First, I just love to say it's so amazing to be on this panel with this amazing group of women who, in many ways, have inspired me a ton. So it's nice to virtually be together. I just want to say that. So somewhat similar to Lisa in terms of just not necessarily always planning to have been an entrepreneur. I certainly did not think that I would spend close to a couple decades at Goldman Sachs. It was not my original plan. I actually joined Goldman right out of college because I thought it would be a really great way to save up money to go to law school. And I got hooked. Growing up between Lagos, Nigeria, and Houston, Texas, I was able to witness, a lot of poverty in my own childhood. And being at Goldman was the first time I realized just the power of private capital and what it means to be able to allocate it and make decisions about, what neighborhoods get investment and what companies get investment. And unfortunately, in a lot of the work I do, the counter to that, what neighborhoods and businesses and entrepreneurs unfortunately do not get capital, even though there's significant talent there. And I really got hooked. I started out on the sales and trading side of the business and really learned the capital markets from that seat. But pretty early in my tenure, I was able to transition over to the business that I now run, the Urban Investment Group. And at every step, we've been able to, have greater ambitions and grow this business. When I joined, we were investing roughly $10 to $20 million a year, and that was a significant effort. And now we deploy over $1 billion a year in underserved places for the benefit of families and individuals. And so I would say what's been really impactful for me, every day is not easy. The challenges that we're trying to solve and the stakeholders that depend on us are, it can be heavy. It's very serious stuff. If we can't pull a deal together or get it over the finish line, there's real loss there. But I use that to fuel me. I think that the work that my team are able to do is really important. I take a lot of pride in it. I have a lot of passion around it. I'm able to channel, sometimes even negative emotions into the work when, I feel like I don't like what I see happening in communities or the plight of, folks and kids who grew up in a low-income neighborhood just like I did. And so it's been helpful, at least for me, to use that as fuel and know that the more that I can succeed, the more that our business can grow. That's going to mean real tangible impact for, Black and brown kids around the country who, for no fault of their own, just grew up in a neighborhood that maybe doesn't provide the level of opportunity that are found in other communities. And so I'd say kind of to distill that at least into a message for other women, and certainly what's been helpful for me, is to find something you love, that you love in its best days, that you love in its worst days, even if it's difficult and challenging. I think having that greater mission or purpose around it just helps kind of get through some of those tough moments. Because I certainly would not at all say that a career in finance is easier or straightforward, but the benefits can be incredibly worthwhile, and they have been for me.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. And I'm sure the audience now can see why we're so excited about this panel, because each has been so incredibly successful. And again, you're fantastic people. Next, we have Nellie Gallen, Emmy award-winning producer, the leader of Telemundo. She went on to take her passions and make sure that women are learning how to become great entrepreneurs. And so she's accomplished in corporate America. And she became an author. It's a New York Times bestseller. And welcome. And we want to hear a little bit about you and your path. Nellie, thank you so much for joining us. Look at this. We should just take a picture of this right here. What an incredible collection of individuals. And what advice do you want to make sure that entrepreneurs or would-be entrepreneurs in the audience, women in particular, can do and should be doing to make sure that we bend that arc so that there's more wealth?
Well, first, I just want to say it's an honor to be here with you and with Lisa and Margaret. And Lisa, I've been at many events together, and I always love, and I get inspired every time I hear these incredible women. And we have to do a shout out to Connie, who's been there for women entrepreneurs for so long. I think for me, I'm in the middle of a crisis. And I realize that there have been many crises in my life, just like so many of the women listening. how many crises come into our lives that are both beyond our control, like this one, and then crises that we create. And yet, after every crisis, something great comes out of it. And I do think that, to me, that's the lesson for today is, what are we learning from this crisis? And as entrepreneurs, these are very hard times for us. And yet this is a moment to stop and say, is what we're doing correct? Could we be doing it better? For me, I think I'm almost used to crises because I think what really turned me into an entrepreneur, unknowing it, is that I left my country in a communist regime when I was 5 years old. My parents, who were not wealthy people, had worked really hard to go to school to get jobs. And from one day to the next, we had to leave with the shirt off our back. And I heard my parents say at 5, why didn't we start a business? And why didn't we create an export business so we'd have other options? Why didn't we take money out of the bank before this happened, before this crash? And I learned at 5 that bad things happen to good people. And that when you live in a country where you think everything is safe, bad things could happen. And I also learned that the best way to go through it is as an owner of a business. Even if things go bad, even if things are rough, because you have skills. What we don't realize is the one thing no one can take away from you is that when you have built something from scratch, you can do, if there's a world war and you had to move to Russia and you had to learn Russian and you had to start all over again, you could do it. And those are things that most people don't know how to do. So I think in this moment, what I would say is stop and reflect for a minute. Did I always want to take my business digital and I was waiting because I didn't, and now guess what? You got to do it. Is what have you learned and how can you take yourself to a higher place? Because this road, although difficult, is the only road to build wealth. And for women of color, we have to understand, the reason I wrote this book and I really have been devoted to it and traveling the country for the last 6 years is because self-made doesn't mean that you make yourself by yourself. We know God and our parents make us, but in order to make it to the end of your life, you're going to have to DIY yourself from the inside out and make yourself over. And self-made is a mindset that we know that no one's coming to save us, our families, or our communities. We have to save ourselves by building wealth, and we do it entrepreneurially.
That's fantastic. Thank you so very much. Very, very powerful there. You said a couple of things that I just want to double click on and punctuate. And that is, when you think about returns, like over a long period of time, if you're investing in the stock market, the long-term returns are about 10%. But in fact, it's never really 10%. Most of the returns come after the crisis. And not everybody appreciates that. So if you run in the midst of the crisis and go like this, you won't enjoy the returns. So we are in the middle of the crisis, and many times it is the fear, we talked about it, and the lack of belief that we talked about that stops people from doing it. The other point that you made is that the only way we're going to increase that wealth is to take risk. So talk to us about two things, risks that you have taken and crises that you've experienced personally that you've been able to turn around. And while you're sharing your story, can you tap into the resource of tools that were particularly helpful that you think the audience might benefit from?
Are you asking me?
I'm asking each of you.
Oh, okay.
So we can start with you because you're there.
No, it's okay. I think we should start with someone else. I just wanted to, I didn't know because I can't hear that well, but thank you.
Margaret?
Yeah, I can start. I would say, and I referenced this very briefly earlier, I would say a personal crisis I had that I was able to turn around into something productive is the first moment I had where I realized that my career was not necessarily perfectly in line with my values and the impacts that I wanted to create. So I mentioned I started at Goldman in sales and trading, and I loved the vibrancy of the trading floor. I enjoyed the people that I worked with. I really loved my team, and I liked the fast pace of it. But I knew that there was something nagging at me that was missing. And I had some really great mentors at the time. Actually, Val, I'm sure you know Val Carlotti, the other Val. And was able to get advice from folks, because my first thought was, let me leave the firm, let me figure out a whole new path. And that's when I got introduced to the Urban Investment Group as an idea. And it was a relatively small business at the time, but I felt incredibly ambitious around the idea. And I knew nothing about real estate. I knew nothing about investing. I remember spending, 3 or 4 weekends in a row. I didn't go to business school. So I was reading these, dense business school textbooks that I, borrowed, begged, and stealed from, my sister and friends, and was, trying to teach myself about this work so I could get this job. The Urban Investment Group at the time was not hiring. And so I basically was begging for a job that did not exist, that I had no experience and expertise to lend to it. And I just knew that it was something I wanted to do. I thought the mission of the group was incredible. And I just figured, what are they going to do if I just keep begging to work in this group? And so I was able to just turn that kind of, feeling of loss and missing out on something into the drive that led me to the position I'm in today. And it's funny, that was, 15 years ago. And if I hadn't have taken that leap and, had faith in myself that I could figure it out, and that I could perform, and that I could, work the extra miles and hours to catch up and gain the expertise I needed to be successful in the role, I wouldn't be in the position I am today, where we have a fabulous team. We've grown the business significantly. We're able to really step up in this moment and in this crisis with, partners we've built over a long period of time in communities where we have, great relationships and, real stakeholders at the table that we're able to leverage to really guide our work. And so I would say it was, as much of a crisis as you can say you're in when you're 22.
Yeah.
But for me, that was a real, a motivating time, and a time where it felt like significant risk. And I was able to lean on, mentors and friends and family and colleagues and myself to really just jump into that role. And that was a great transition. And I shudder to think, where I'd be if I hadn't been able to take that risk and willing to take that risk.
I love that. Thank you so much. I'm really glad that you're here as well. And I know that you have to leave, and we don't have you for long. You are the capital allocator, and investors, and entrepreneurs need that capital. So tell us a little bit about your resources there at Goldman, and the types of things that you've been investing in, and what advice would you give to entrepreneurs who are coming to capital providers?
Sure. Yeah, so we have two main components of the business, and I have to give a big thank you to Lisa, who's been a significant mentor and provide a lot of guidance to Goldman Sachs as we've built our 10,000 Small Businesses Initiative, which I'll get to in a second. But so our team focuses exclusively on underserved places and people. So we think about it from a geographic lens. So what are the neighborhoods around the country, and sometimes whole cities, that have not gotten their fair share of capital? And I don't want to be ahistorical about it, but I won't go into a full history lesson. But I think many of us understand just the impact that redlining and quite unfortunate racist government policies had for many of the Black and brown communities in the country, where lending capital was not something that flowed. Individuals and families were not able to buy and own homes, which, as we know, is one of the most significant venues of wealth creation in the country today, just your home equity. And so many Black and brown communities were left out of that. And then the other piece, which Nellie mentioned earlier, it's around entrepreneurship and business as another big channel to really create wealth and start to close those racial wealth gaps. So our approach is comprehensive. So we invest a lot in the built environment in these communities, and that is everything from housing, right? Starting with a safe and affordable place to live, we view as the primary building block for healthy communities. And then it's all the other amenities around that are important and create neighborhoods of opportunity. So that's, where do you go buy your quart of milk, right? Healthy food access in grocery stores, healthcare facilities, educational facilities. We do a lot of, industrial and commercial real estate, which creates jobs. So really a comprehensive approach to really lift up and start to redevelop some of these neighborhoods that just have not had significant investment capital over the years. And then the other part of it, which I touched on with 10,000 small businesses, is then investing in the businesses and entrepreneurs that are the real backbone of those communities. So over the last 12 years, our firm has had an initiative called 10,000 Small Businesses, where we provide education, business support services, and access to capital to small businesses. This is something that we felt passionate about for a long time, and I think we're seeing it, ever more in this moment today, just how important our small businesses are, right? They employ half of our American workforce. They are the bedrock of our community services. They are the culture in our communities. And so my team has managed for the last decade the access to capital component of that initiative. And so we provide lending facilities to community-driven lenders who are able to reach the businesses that may not have a banking relationship, maybe in a community that is underbanked, banking deserts, or businesses that are just smaller and need that extra, technical assistance and support to get through the process of getting a loan and getting the growth capital that they need for their business. So across those two parts of the business is both the neighborhood built environment work and our small business lending. We deploy over $1 billion a year around the country. It's incredible work. We work in places, like Harlem and the South Bronx, here in New York City. Detroit's a place we've invested a lot post-bankruptcy. We've spent a lot of time investing and working in different neighborhoods in New Orleans that were completely devastated post-Katrina. And in this moment, in this crisis, it's some of these same communities that we see being the hardest hit, not just with the economic impacts of this crisis, but of course, the racial disparities we're seeing in these communities from a health standpoint. And so all of this work that we've been doing in these communities for a long time, it's never been more important. We are, doubling down. We're, our small business lending commitment that we started with 10,000 small businesses was $250 million, which we deployed over a decade. And about a month or two ago, we actually made another $500 million commitment, which we deployed in a couple months. So that's just how passionately we feel about this, how the depth of this crisis that we're in. We feel that we're just in the early stages, and so we're looking forward to working with all of the same stakeholders that we've built relationships with over time to continue to invest in those places that, look, we're not in a great position even prior to this pandemic, but are certainly showing those severe signs of distress. And what we want, our goal with this investing is to make sure that these same communities, which did not weather this last recovery in the way that we saw the overall country come back, to not repeat those same mistakes and not let difficult prioritization, whether that's around where private capital is allocated, around public sector budgets and initiatives, to say this is not the time to pull back on these communities and these underserved businesses and founders, but quite the opposite. It's a moment to really lean in and make sure that these incredible backbones of our neighborhoods and our communities not just weather this storm, but are able to really come through it with even more resilience.
That's fantastic. We're getting some questions, and sometimes when you think about, when I think about wealth, I don't think just about financial wealth. It's comprehensive wealth. And if we really want to make a difference, there's some things that are happening to you personally that help your personal wealth grow. Do you care to touch on that and the mindset that you bring to your family for the audience? And let me ask the question that's for you before you leave, because we spoke yesterday. It turns out that her husband used to be my mentee, Sean Anderson. He's beautiful, he's brilliant, and they have two lovely, incredible children. And I just think that when we think about wealth, it's not just professional, it's not just financial, it's also personal. So if you speak to the mindset that you guys have brought together to help that wealth family generationally, I think that would be great. And I'm going to ask some questions as well. So answer that, and I'm going to throw this out for others to remember. Women, we know women are starting businesses at high rates, but I'm curious if anyone knows how many of those businesses actually survive or grow. How many of those businesses actually provide a living wage for women? So if you can speak on that, because I know you have to leave, we can continue our panel is going to continue a little longer, but I've got a note that she's got to run.
Yeah, I would say it's interesting that the comprehensive sort of view of wealth. I view it first and foremost with my family and my husband. I'm sitting on, especially in this moment, you know, I always feel a lot of privilege, but I'm certainly feeling that far more significantly today. You know, I have a husband who's home full time with my kids, so he is doing all of the homeschooling. I'm lucky enough to live with my mother. She lives in the garden apartment right downstairs. I have two older sisters. One lives around the corner and one lives upstairs. So it's almost like we have a little compound here in Brooklyn. And I would say that as we think about our kids and what wealth looks like comprehensively for us, it's making sure that we're living by example. You know, my daughter's going to turn 5 soon, and my son just turned 3. And the amount of time and probably we overdo it, quite frankly, the amount of time we spend talking about, you know, privilege and the coronavirus and who's getting hurt and, you know, what mommy does for a living and, you know, what is impact investing. And actually, one quick funny story, my 3-year-old at breakfast the other day, he's like, "Mommy, you keep saying PPP. All you say is PPP. That's not how the alphabet goes. It's not PPP," which just like it shows you just the level of conversation in our home. You know, for me, it's making sure that everything that I'm doing, not just personally in our home, but professionally, are things that I'm proud of, that my, you know, daughter can look up to, and my son can look up to, and my husband, who, you know, Val mentioned that she knows. You know, he's really great and a big part of this as well. You know, he's always, you know, explaining to them like what we do and what it means to work, and that, you know, not only do I have a job and career where we're able to be helpful to other people, but that it's a privilege to work. You know, that it is a privilege to be able to contribute to your community and your society and do so in a way that leverages your skills. And the way you have skills is because it is a privilege to, you know, have a great education. And so a lot of that is just, you know, conversations and time we're spending with the family to make sure, you know, that everyone is all on board and invested in this. But I certainly don't, you know, I don't feel like I just work at Goldman. I feel like my husband works at Goldman, my kids work at Goldman, and my sisters. So it's definitely you know, an all-in kind of an environment at this moment, which is nice. And I'm lucky to have that.
Thank you very much. So we're going to shift over to an audience question. How can women build relationships with banks, CDFIs, government agencies, service providers, and utilize those relationships to their advantage in this crisis? And this brings me to Lisa, who talks about the power of her relationships, and to Nellie, both of them. And so I'm going to open up to both of you. Jump in as you'd like to address this very issue around relationships. They're so key.
Well, speaking specifically about relationships with banks, when I first started Carol's Daughter and I realized that I was in a place where I needed to have a business account, I went to a bank in the neighborhood. I attempted to open up a business account. I already had a personal account with this bank. And unfortunately, I was not allowed to open up the business account. My personal identification was not considered to be valid at the time because my passport had expired. And I did not quite understand the rationale for this because I had a personal account with the bank. So my signature was on file, et cetera. And when I questioned, you know, why isn't there some other way that you can verify who I am? Because I'm already banking with you. You already have my money on a personal level. The response that I was given was that due to the fact that there were a number of illegal businesses in the area, they had no way of knowing whether or not I would be setting up this account to launder drug money, which I just heard as, oh, it's because I'm Black and you're being racist. And even though you're in my neighborhood, you can't see past what you think this neighborhood is. And I left angry and, upset, and decided that I wasn't going to even fight with them to try and give them my money. And I ended up setting up a business account that was with a bank out of state and was online. And that was something that people just didn't do at the time. And that worked great for me. And I was able to, build my business and set up credit card sales and things like that for a number of years. But then there came a time when I needed to walk back into the bank, actually walked back into the same bank that had denied me, but they had been taken over by someone else at this point. And I established a personal relationship with the manager of the bank. I explained what had happened to me before, why I was hesitant to come back, but knew that this was the best bank for me. And perhaps given the fact that they were under different management, they would take a different approach. And that manager was very sympathetic, very hands-on. We had a personal relationship in that whenever someone came in with a deposit, they always made sure that they said hello. When my staff came to cash their checks, there was always a wave and a hello. So when it came time for me to put in my first application for a business loan in order to expand, it was done in a personal way. I did all the technical paperwork things that needed to be done. But because of this relationship that I had with her, because she knew my business, she knew my employees, she knew what I was building, she personally gave the application to her boss, who would have to give her the go-ahead to approve it. And she even brought him to my home where I had people working in my home. And she took him to my store and explained to him that the people that were working for me were people from the neighborhood, people that other people would not hire, that I had hired. And that if I'm able to do all that I've done without a loan and without help, what more could I do with the help? But had it not been for that personal relationship, I don't think any of that would happen. And even though we live today in an even more digital and virtual world, I think those personal connections are critical, especially when it comes to our businesses and our stories. There are times where we need to over explain and show people what it is that we do. And we may not have an advocate like Margaret and her team to do that for us if we're not a part of an organization like that. So we have to advocate for ourselves.
That's a really good point. That's a really good point. Nellie, there are several questions that are coming in that I think you are perfectly positioned to answer. And you've going around the world telling women and entrepreneurs what they need to know financially. So here it is. For organizations that serve women-owned businesses, what advice would you give on how to be innovative in closing the knowledge and access gap that women entrepreneurs, particularly those of color, experience in navigating the financial system? And in your experience, what resources and services are available to help aspiring women launch their business in beta in order to ease the pressure of feeling like they have to have everything perfectly in place before they launch?
Right. All great questions.
And the last question is around COVID, like right now, what is it that people can do differently? And I know you have a view on those answers.
So I've spent the last couple of months doing Zoom classes for free for women of how to fill out the PPP forms. So I have like very real-time experience understanding where women of color, where there's a gap for women of color. And I think there is a gap in our knowledge of financial services in this country, a gap of where is the money, where are the opportunities. And I think that in a world where financial systems, everybody talks about low touch, we need high touch. And so I think for all of us, what we have to first recognize is it's okay that we don't have a CFO. It's okay that we don't even have an accountant that we can even get on the phone during COVID. We really have to advocate for ourselves and find out how can we engage with the financial services in this country. So for a moment, going back to what Lisa said, if I had not walked into a bank at 25 and saw someone that was Latina that kind of looked like me to me, and I said to her, I need a banker, and she has become my banker for 20 some years. If that had not happened to me, I don't think I would be where I am today. But even I, with really advocating and finding a mortgage broker and finding a banker and finding all this, I didn't know that the EIDL disaster loan was in place since 1954, and that the SBA was really available to me, and that besides PPP, that the SBA had programs that help you get government contracts. I didn't know any of this. I didn't know about supplier diversity, and that corporations have contracts for entrepreneurs that overnight could scale your business, and that they have to find minority and women-owned businesses. I didn't know any of these things. So I think that if organizations that want to help us, and if we want to help ourselves, we have to first acknowledge that we have a learning gap. We were never told any of this stuff. Nobody ever marketed this information to us. And I think that is the biggest problem we have, because we have the willingness. So what I would say is the number one thing that I've learned from this crisis, because I have been through many crises in my business. First of all, as you said in the beginning, I started out as employee one of Telemundo, where I was an intern and assistant. I knew nobody. Worked my way up, became the first woman president of entertainment, but then left and started my own company and basically became Latina Tyler Perry. So in the process of that, I have gone through earthquakes. I have gone through 9/11. I have gone through 2008 bad economy, where my business went down, and where at times I thought I was going to lose my business. And each time I had to figure it out and come back bigger and better, because there are great opportunities in crises that we have to go get. So I would say, number one, we have to have our paperwork always ready to go. I think if you're an entrepreneur, you have to say to yourself, the number one thing I have to do is organize my paperwork. So if mortgage rates go down, we refinance. If there is money that I find out that, from any organization, from the government, from corporations, my paperwork is ready to go so I can fill out the forms. And then I have to use the organizations that are out there. What have I learned in this pandemic? I joined the governor of California's task force for entrepreneurship and small business. I learned that there are all these women or offices for women that are federally funded and state funded, the SBDAs, all these organizations that are out there for us. We have entrepreneur coaches for free, in this country. We have all, but we don't use it, and it's not marketed to women of color. So I am here, and I know all of us on this panel are dedicated, and this organization is dedicated to making sure that we can access the information, the money, the resources, and everything that comes out of a crisis, which is going to happen many more times in our lives. So to me, those organizations need to market to us and find us where we are. And we need to advocate and go find what is out there for us. You're all here, which is a great thing to do. But look at all of the people that are out there and all of the organizations out there that are there to help you get this money. I can tell you in my own community, in the Latino community, I've been doing all these webinars with Univision and saying, in Spanish, why are you guys not applying for the PPP?
That's right.
Because we don't feel part of this country. No, because we're afraid if we fill out the paperwork wrong, the IRS is going to say something. We're afraid we're going to get punished. Why?
That's right.
We deserve it. We are paying our taxes. We are here in this country to take advantage of the things that are there for us.
That you're absolutely right. There is so much fear. The same thing that's happening in the Latino community is happening in the African American community. A friend of mine, Steve Rogers, is going around, and others are saying, take the PPP. He says it's better than the 40 acres and the mule. And most people are afraid. I don't want to do it. I don't know if I'm going to fill it out right. So I think that we should, you worked on the movement, and you give busy people a challenge. We're going to come together. Why don't we gather those resources? There's several questions around what are the resources that are available. We can gather them. We'll help put them together. And Connie, we're just throwing it out. Let's make sure that AEO helps to market this information. Lisa has agreed in advance to be supportive of women, and I'm working on a book as well. Nellie has a book. We are each available to women to say, you too can be an entrepreneur, and to have the courage. At the end of the day, we have to take risks. But each of us said that if we're going to have that wealth, you can't fly unless you're willing to let your feet leave the ground. And entrepreneurship, we have to own assets that are going to go up in value. And yes, being an entrepreneur is not easy, but that asset, when successful, will go up in value much faster. That's how we're going to bend that curve.
That's why I say in my book, don't buy shoes, buy buildings.
Exactly.
If we just sit home and take the money and buy things, we're never going to get to where we need to go. And, I had a boss, an older Jewish man that I worked for many years ago when I was an employee. And he said to me, young lady, when you grow up and make money, he goes, don't buy bling. He goes, you need to make money while you sleep. You need to invest in things. And I was like, what is he saying? And he was right. The money you make and the money you save, which we have to save money. We learned in a pandemic, you have to have money saved. And then that money that you save has to be invested. The American financial system is based on money flowing. You have to invest the money. If you don't invest the money, you're not making money while you sleep. So life is about mission and money. Mission and money. You have to flow the money.
And my mission is to make sure that I teach as many people as possible how to value themselves enough to invest in themselves, to learn to invest. That's the only way that you're going to create wealth, the only way. And on that note, I wanted, and we talk about the crisis. We're here in the crisis. Now is the time. And you guys are stunning examples of having done that. You took a risk when it was frightening. You could have stayed at Telemundo. You could have continued to do what you were doing. You took a risk, and it was challenging, but you continued to believe in yourself. And I want to say, everybody's talking about, remember this campaign around 76 cents or 72 cents on income, right? I get that. And everyone's up in arms about women aren't earning enough. It's not about the earning. When we look at wealth, it's cents on the dollar. It's literally pennies on the dollar. So women and women of color, we have to invest. We have to take risks. I'm willing to teach as much as I can around investing in the markets. You guys are teaching around entrepreneurship. I even left Wellington where I was, and I'm an entrepreneur now. We just have to do it. And I am so excited to be in your presence because you're awesome. You're awesome professionally. You're awesome individuals. My grandmother, you talked about Carol's daughter. You were motivated by your mother and your daughter, Lisa, and you too, Nellie, and I know Margaret is, and she left. It's like we have to share what we know. Like, we're blessed and highly favored. We have to share what we know, and that's what you're doing. So I just want to
I think it's important to share that it isn't something that we had figured out. It's something that you're learning. And even as we're going through this pandemic, I feel very blessed that I have the support system that I have, that I'm a part of a company that is really leaning in and taking care of staff. And, we're all keeping ourselves connected. I happen to have a business within that company that is something that people need. People need shampoo and conditioner. So our sales are not tanking. And I don't take any of that for granted. But I've also had to learn how to do my own makeup, how to set up the lighting so that I don't look crazy doing this thing, because there's no production team to call in. There's no makeup artist to call in. There's no hair person to call in. Embrace my grays and just, hey, we're going to be looking at them for a while until we can do something about it. Figuring out things that I didn't used to have to figure out before. And there is part of that you sort of feel angry, like, haven't I worked hard enough that I don't have to do these kinds of things? And the universe is like, no, actually, no. So suck it up and let's keep going. And I know from experience that what that means is, on the other side of it, I'm stronger. I know more. I have more to share. I have more to teach. Yes, give yourself grace as you're going through this period, because it is difficult. It is hard. It's not normal. It's out of your control. But also recognize you are being pushed to work harder for a reason. You're being pushed to be self-sufficient. You're being reminded, have your own business, have your own money set aside. Even if it's a tiny nest egg, just start building it. This is, unfortunately, a sign of more things to come, and we will not be returning to what we perceive to be normal. It is not going to be the same. So don't waste your energy waiting for that to happen. Create your future right now.
That is so true. And I'm going to ask
Lisa,
you guys to
thank
think
you for saying that. Thank you for saying all that. I really so appreciate that too. And I just want to add that I think one of the things that nobody tells people of color is, when a pandemic happens or a crisis happens, wealthy people are like, they're kind of like, hey, this is great because it's a great time to invest. And we have so much drama and trauma that when anything happens, it's like, oh, there it is. The shoe fell again. Another thing went wrong. And for me, it's post-traumatic stress syndrome, because I hear my parents going, why did we have to leave our country? And now we have no money. And, it's like, it's always a drama. I just want you to know that if you just save a little bit of money, you will enter the next crisis with greater grace. And you're going to go, maybe I can buy a building now. Maybe I can actually launch another business. Maybe I can do. So I want us all to also remember that trauma that we have and that negative psychology we have is hundreds and thousands of years old. And in fact, people that have saved money enter a crisis almost like, it's sad, you feel bad, but actually you have money to give back to other people. You have money to help other people. There's times that you have to accept being taken care of. And the beauty of being an entrepreneur is that you finally get to the point where you have it to give back to others. And that only happens through entrepreneurship. But also, even entrepreneurs, I've been talking to so many of you, even entrepreneurs forget to save money. They start making some money and they start living large. You always have to live beneath your means, no matter how rich you are. No matter how rich you are. So the next crisis, it's always going to be a next crisis, whether it's a force majeure crisis beyond our control or it's a life crisis, something that happens to you. You always have to have that buffer so you can enter that crisis as someone who can invest in others and in your future instead of someone who is in a crisis, a real crisis. And I think that's something to think about.
Absolutely right. Very well said. So we're going to go to some closing comments, and I just want to drive home the point that when people are afraid, it's really the market is on sale. Right? We all like the sale. It's in the middle of the crisis that the market is actually on sale. So take a moment and give your final table pounding points that you'd like the audience to hear. And in our audience, we have those who are serving and lending to entrepreneurs, as well as people who want to be entrepreneurs and they haven't quite gotten there, or those who are in the middle of it and they're facing this crisis and don't know what to do. Closing thoughts.
Okay, I'll start. If you are an entrepreneur and you are not working for someone else and you're figuring this out, try to look at it through the lens of This is not something that I have done, because we tend to look at things as, oh, this would have been so much better if I had just, and it wouldn't be so bad for me if I wasn't so. Give yourself grace and recognize this is something beyond your control. You couldn't have planned for it. You couldn't have foreseen it. And if you have to begin again, if that is what your path is, know that you can survive it, and you will be even more knowledgeable and stronger than you were today. But try to look at it through that unbiased lens so that you can really see what your path forward is. Now, if you happen to be a person who's an entrepreneur or thinking about being an entrepreneur, but you currently work for someone else, and if your position within your current company, if your employer offers the flexibility for you to continue to work from home just as a matter of safety, take advantage of that. Don't be in a rush to return to what we thought was normal. Take advantage of how you've learned how to manage your time thus far and split yourself between work and home life, because it is much easier for you to pursue your entrepreneurial dreams when you're at home than it is if you were in the office. So if you were able to hold on to an income and hold on to benefits while building and work on two things at once, absolutely lean into that and take advantage of that, because we do not know when this opportunity would present itself again. And for a lot of companies that have the digital capabilities, it is much safer for them to have their employees work from home than to put them at risk sending them to the office.
Great. Thank you, Lisa.
Beautiful.
Nellie?
Well, I would say that for me, I figured out when I was 31 years old that I wanted to be a millionaire. I wanted to be someone that made money. I knew that if I worked for other people and I constantly told them, this is what's going wrong in the company, and they didn't listen to me, I knew that I wanted to do that. That's not for everybody, but whether you are an entrepreneur or you work for others, this world that we live in is going to require in these next 100 years that you think like a self-made person and that you invest like a self-made person, even when you work for others. So I can only tell you, if I at 31 had saved $5,000 and I started my TV career, which sounds very glamorous, but TV was very up and down. Some years I made money, some years I made nothing. I lived beneath my means. I invested those $5,000 in my first little tiny building condo. I kept flipping those buildings. I used the tax laws in my favor to not pay tax and be moving that money forward to more buildings. And by the time I was 45, I had 16 buildings.
Wow.
And I'm not J-Lo. I'm not Beyonce. I'm not an athlete. I'm an ordinary person that started out as an intern with no experience. I hadn't even finished college. I went back to college at 45 because I could retire if I wanted to.
No way.
And I got a master's and a doctorate. If I could do it, you can do it. I enter crises in grace because I live beneath my means. I've always saved money. And I think, what am I going to do next? What is the next big thing? A crisis is a reset button to really look inward and say, what have I left to do? At 20, you're thinking to your 50. When you're in your 50s, you're thinking to 85. What do I want to do before I die? What do I want to leave my community, my family? It's a time to you can be sad. You can mourn the fact that maybe you didn't do it right this time. Start now. Do it right to get to the next crisis, and so that you get there in grace and can make money during a crisis. So I want you all to think that this is a moment of grace and a special moment to not go backwards, to go forward. I love the word in Spanish, adelante. Move off our butts and let's go.
Adelante. I love that. I love that. And I just want to summarize a couple of things. This is fantastic because Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, when they fail, they say, I'm experienced. Often women of color, when we fail, we're failures. That's one. Two, you took risk when you were young, when you didn't know it. Each of you took risk. And Again, the market's on sale. We're in the middle of a crisis. And there was a study that was done of people who are older sitting on the porch. They're in their 80s, 90s. What do they regret most? What they never tried. It's the point that you made, Lisa, in the beginning. It's what we never try. So if we want that comprehensive wealth, we've got to go inside and say, what is it that we want? Nellie, you did that. You wanted to be a millionaire. You always loved, Lisa, working with your products, and you followed your passions. Margaret loves making an impact, and she did it. So when we go inside in this crisis and say, what do I want? What do I not want to regret? And what am I willing to risk doing? Because I'm worthy enough to try it. And so I am so excited about our panelists and our panel, because you're awesome. You're doing great work, and we have to get the wealth. And that only comes with taking a risk and saving and living below the means, and go out there and make it happen. And we're going to give as many resources as we can. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Nellie. Thank you, Margaret. Thank you, Connie. Thank you, AEO. This is fantastic. And so much more is about to come.
And ladies, remember, adelante.
Adelante.
Sí, adelante. And I just want to say I'm super, super thrilled to be on a panel with Nellie again. I absolutely adore you. Thank you so much for this, AEO. This was great to be together with these women, and Margaret, the work that she does at Goldman. You know, Goldman Sachs is near and dear to my heart. I have a wonderful banker at Goldman Sachs who was with me when I didn't have a dime, and I adore her. And this has just been a great way to spend a Wednesday morning.
Yeah, somebody else asked a question about resources, and Goldman now, they've identified entrepreneurs. You can apply to their program, and once they get the entrepreneurs, they're going to give you all of the resources that they would give a very big client. So these can be micro startup companies. You've got the resources, you've got special experts, you've got funding, etc. So go to Goldman. I know it's a plug for Goldman, but there's so many other resources that you found, Nellie, right? You're about to say something,
Yeah,
I see.
I just want to say that whoever wants to reach me, I'm at becomingselfmade.com, and we're doing every week. This week I'm doing 2 webinars for free with the SBA for all women of color to help you not only still get PPP loans, but then what do you do when you get the loan? How do you make sure that it's forgiven? So I'm doing webinars every week. So just come and go to my website and send me a note, and we'll invite you.
And say where to go again?
becomingselfmade.com. Just send me a note at info@becomingselfmade.com.
That's great. And we're going to have conversations afterwards where Lisa's going to give her advice. I'm going to be giving advice around worth and wealth. And we're just resources for you guys. And Roland Martin, Unfiltered, thank you for offering this. And this is an example of this crisis. I told Connie yesterday, this is a blessing in disguise. This was going to be in Texas. We were going to have 600 to 800 people. Now it can be global, and so many other people are going to see it. More entrepreneurs, more would-be entrepreneurs, go out there and get it. You can do it. Don't accept no. It's not about, I think that the biggest challenge that we have often is in our head. If we want to create generational wealth, we have to generationally demonstrate that I'm willing to take a chance. Like, I'm going to bet on me. And failure is experience. It's information. It's not that you are a failure. So get out there, because you are going to be, as you said, Lisa, much more sad if you don't try than if you tried and you failed. So there is no excuse. Let's just make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Valerie, and that wonderful panel on the female paradox. And now for a word from our flagship sponsor, Wells Fargo. Let's hear from one of the business owners that they support.
Hi, Cha-Cha. You give kisses?
No, she hasn't. I've always had a passion and a love for animals, and so I've been in the animal health industry for over 20 years. This is Hedwig. I think animals teach us empathy. They teach us how to relate to each other. They teach us how to comfort each other.
Okay, we'll go back to bed.
When it came time for me to look at the next step in my career, one of my clients was actually looking to go into a different chapter of his life as well. So he was looking to retire and I was looking to purchase my own business. I had some funding and I was able to make an investment. But at the same time, one disadvantage about not being a veterinarian myself is that it's very hard to get funding.
Her determination to really sort of, one is do the homework, be diligent about finding out the various different funding sources.
I think it took about 6 months where I was looking and trying and knocking on doors and making phone calls and filling out applications. It wasn't until I found California Capital, actually through the NAACP, and that's what led me to them.
So in Jamaica's instance, we were able to successfully provide that funding. If she needed to make some alterations, some tenant improvements, her process was, I want to be able to provide some of the updated software equipment.
California Capital is a nonprofit organization. In the communities that we serve, the issue is the lack of access to capital. And our goal is really to get that business from startup phase to growth phase to sustainability phase.
They mentioned that they had different programs and they had different criteria, and they looked at the whole picture as opposed to just the numbers on the page.
By investing in California Capital and the work they do with those small businesses, and we see it every day, that the small businesses that they support, these business owners, are getting education that they need. They're creating business plans. They are thriving.
You're okay, bud.
After the purchase of my first hospital, I met with Dr. Sam Barron, who's now my business partner. And we joined together and created our second hospital in Sacramento about a year later. We intend to continue to grow. We're now looking for our third location. It's been such a great example for my daughter as well, to see her mother become a successful businesswoman. You know, she saw me from the days where I was working very long hours for somebody else, and now she sees me working very long hours, but for us, and that's important. It's created a great work ethic for her. And so I'm proud to be able to give her that example.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the second panel for today, Capital Access, What's in Store for Women in a COVID-Induced Recession. Before we get started, I just have to say, wow. I just have to give a shout out to that previous panel. I mean, the power of Lisa, Margaret, Nellie, their stories. And AEO has asked me to also mention that Nellie and Valerie are authors. They'll be featured in upcoming showcases, so just stay tuned for the timing on that. But wow, I just that was a tough panel to be following. So anyway, I'm Heather McCullough. I'm the founder and executive director of Closing the Women's Wealth Gap. We're a national network of more than 500 nonprofit, philanthropic, public, and private sector leaders that are all really working together to advance public policies and private sector practices that build the financial security of women who are most impacted by gender, wealth, and equality. So specifically, women of color, we work with immigrant women, LGBTQ, and others who are economically marginalized. So I just wanted to point out, Valerie gave me a great segue in the last session when she talked about the difference between the pay gap and the women's wealth gap. So I just want to repeat for you all what she said. For Black and Latinx women, we know that they earn pennies on the dollar compared to white men and white women. We have less data for Native American women and for different subgroups of Asian American and Pacific Islander women. And that data issue is a whole other challenge that we'll be talking about today. But we do know it's less than a penny compared to white men, pennies compared to white women. So that's one of the issues we're going to be talking about today. So as we've been discussing, business ownership is a key wealth-building strategy in the U.S. The issue is that we'll be tackling today is that the research shows that for most women-owned businesses, women business owners are not actually building wealth or business equity for themselves. So last year, we co-published a report with the National Assets Funders Network to try to really understand what was blocking low-wealth entrepreneurs of color, low-wealth women from building business equity. The research was conducted by the Samuel Dubois Center at Duke University, and some of the key barriers they came up with are ones that we've already been talking about: access to capital, occupational segregation, inadequate access to mentors, networks, business education, and training. So as this crisis is deepening, has deepened, all of these challenges have very much intensified for women-owned businesses. And what we're seeing is that the infrastructure of support for them is being severely tested, not only by the radically increased demand, but by the lack of funding for organizations that support women-owned businesses. And not to be too pessimistic, but one of the conference speakers yesterday said, and I quote, "It feels like someone just dropped a bomb on an ecosystem that was already fragile." So I'm just going to go with Nellie's comment from the last session: a crisis is a reset button. We're going to talk today about how this crisis requires us all to work together and how it presents opportunities for us to take action. So I'm so honored to be joined today by my fellow panelists who will help me explore how this crisis is disparately affecting women and women of color specifically. And really, we're going to focus on the call to action. What steps do we all need to be taking to strengthen and support women-owned businesses so that they can be thriving and prospering in the months and years ahead? So let me introduce to you my panelists. I'm so honored to be joined by Del Gines, Senior Community Development Advisor with the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City. Hi, Del.
Hi.
Great. So happy to have you here today. So Del has devoted most of his career to helping empower economically distressed communities. He's a national thought leader in entrepreneurship-led economic development and ecosystem building. He's written 4 guides and an ebook on the subject. And his most recent work is a report on Black women business startups. So happy to have him here today. We're also joined by Elaine Rasmussen. Elaine, yay, hi. How are you this morning? Okay, we couldn't hear you, so let's see if our tech team works.
Sorry, I was on mute. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Elaine is the founder and CEO of Social Impact Strategies Group, or SISG. They provide facilitation and consultation on racial equity and social impact audits, as well as workshops for investors and Black and Brown Women-X entrepreneurs. Elaine herself is a 3-time business owner, so impressive. And in her current endeavor, she's working to drive inclusive systems change grounded in restorative economics and economic justice. So thank you so much both for being with her today. So what we decided is that we're going to kick this off by just grounding our conversation in what the world looked like before the crisis, because we all know that the crisis has only pulled back the veil on some of the inequities that already existed in the system. So Del, I'm going to start with you. Tell us a little bit about the ecosystem of support for women business owners before this all started.
Yeah, and I think it's worthwhile discussing what an ecosystem is, because people often misuse the term. But remember when you said just in the introduction, you talked about the various gaps in support providers and education, funding, et cetera, that came out of the study. Well, those are the pieces of an ecosystem, and an ecosystem is what ties those things together. And ecosystem builders are the ones that are responsible for ensuring that all of these collaborations are occurring across both provider to provider and provider to entrepreneur. And the way that I explain it is, we all heard the African proverb, it takes a village to raise a child, but we never often unpack that. But that's because that child is situated in a household where they get protection from their parents and early stage education and support, and then they go out into the community, that support is reinforced and different kinds of experience and mentors come, and it all works together to really raise up a child that's going to be successful for the community, and then turn around and give back to the community. That's the best way to explain an ecosystem. And so when you talk about the challenges that women face, then what you're seeing is exactly what you said. And this is a national problem. It's not just a woman problem, but it hits specifically women and other vulnerable populations. You see this huge deficit of support systems and anchors within the ecosystems to support these women entrepreneurs. And again, like you said, it shows specifically when major crises like these occur, and now it's like there's no way for us to hide the deficit of support for these kind of entrepreneurs.
That's absolutely right. Lane, I'd like to just get your perspective on the same question. What do you see out there? What's enabling or blocking women entrepreneurs from growing their businesses right now or going into the crisis?
I think I want to double click on a lot of the points that Dell made. So here in the Midwest, so I'm located in Minnesota. We service a 5-state region, but predominantly here in Minnesota. And what we have found, and we've also published a report, the State of the Work report, pick it up. The report talks about this missing middle in resources, networks, and capital. So the missing middle is not just about capital, as Dell has talked about in his report. It's actually all the things that come before that. And Nellie spoke about this in her comments in the panel before, which is we don't have access to the tech systems. We don't have access to how to even get started with these tech systems. As I'm working with entrepreneurs, on video conferencing is a brand new thing to some of our women entrepreneurs and some of our people of color entrepreneurs. So learning what's a CRM, how do you use a CRM to your advantage? How do you leverage that up into your email system? They don't know all of these dots, and they happen to be living in places that don't have broadband accessibility, right? So we talk about indigenous communities, there may not be broadband, or even in the city, in some of our spots in Minneapolis, you have to pay for broadband access when you're just going around the city. So you have to rely on somebody being able to afford an internet connection in their home to even be able to manage their business productively and efficiently. So we have to look at a wide range of things of getting people into the pipeline, entrepreneurs of color into the pipeline, but that starts way down the line. It doesn't just start when they're looking for capital for their business. Also that they have to see themselves. So one of the things that we're combating here in the Twin Cities is lifting up the stories of entrepreneurs. We do a lot of exceptionalism where we hold up one brown entrepreneur or one Black entrepreneur or one female entrepreneur, and everything rests on their shoulders. And then when they fail, it's a black eye to the whole entire community, as opposed to, we don't do that with white businesses. When a white business fails, a white business fails. It's not a demarcation of the success or lack of success to all the other businesses. So for us, it's really about servicing that pipeline long before. So we talk about cradle to grave. It's providing those resources way up front. I think Lisa from Carol's Daughter talked about this up front, of like knowing how to build a relationship with a banker. What does that mean? What does that look like? How do you go and find a mentor? These might seem as simple things, but when you've been systematically disenfranchised over hundreds of years, you can't now expect people to know how to do those things.
So I want to ask this question to both of you. Tell us a little bit, and you've mentioned it, but given that fragile ecosystem where we are now, let's talk a little bit about access to capital. So I know in our conversations ahead of time that you were saying capital is a piece of this bigger picture, but we also know right now cash is key to keeping women-owned businesses alive. So Elaine, why don't we start with you on this one? You know, what role does access to capital play right now in these times?
I think it's a big, huge role. And one of the challenges that we see is there is a lot of capital if you're a startup or if you're wanting less than $1,000. So we have lots of micro grant opportunities. And then we have capital once you hit $1 million of revenue. We have some great CDFIs that offer $100,000, $150,000, $200,000. $200,000 investment. But there's a missing gap in the middle, which a lot of the entrepreneurs, when I think back to Lisa's story of Carol's daughter, of what she needed that first time, she didn't need $100,000. She probably needed $25,000, $35,000, $40,000. And if you don't already own a home where you can borrow against the collateral of your home, then what do? You've got to really have somebody who has faith in you and confidence in you. And she tells the story of, like, it was really a personal relationship with her banker who hand walked her application over to her boss, made her boss come to Lisa's house to see what was being done and the impact that she was already making without capital, and what could she do if she actually had capital. So it's really about, for us in the Midwest, we need a broader scope of capital. We need more flexible capital. We need patient capital. And we need people not to be looking at just market rate returns, 8 to 12% return. Because when you're talking about investing in a community that's been continuously divested, there's no real practical way that they can meet those returns and actually do the impact and do the business that they're trying to do.
Exactly. That was so helpful. Del, what's your perspective on the importance of capital access?
Yeah, right now, I mean, it's very important for existing businesses because you've lost all your client base. So, basically, and this is not the way you obviously want to use capital. You want to use capital for productive purposes, to be able to use it to financially leverage your business to grow at a faster pace. In this time period, we're just looking at survivability, basically. We're trying to create a bridge over troubled waters, if you will, for firms so that when their customers come back, they'll be able to still be in existence and then use their customer and net profit revenue and other things to continue to spur their business growth. I have a audio cast coming out with two women from organizations that support, Black women entrepreneurs. And one of them made the point, she said, and a lot of clients that she talked to, a lot of her women in her organization said, we don't want a loan, we just want our clients back. Because on the last panel, they made the important point that a lot of people are scared and confused about what these stimulus-based products are lending. And also, if you're an investor or even a banker, do you really want to lend at this point to a business that may not have any customers and you don't know when the economy is going to reopen? So right now, the issue of capital is one of survivability. It's not a productivity, which is what should normally happen in the marketplace. And unfortunately, there's gaps in access to both. Like all the anecdotes that we've heard, and I would almost argue that it's beyond the point of anecdotal now of small businesses and minority businesses having significant challenges accessing these stimulus funds. And because a large chunk of women-owned businesses are very, very small, I'm putting them at a small business category. Like even the access to capital that is traditionally in the marketplace is extended into, the COVID pandemic. And so I'm very concerned for a lot of our women-owned businesses, to be honest, because of this deficit of, I'm going to just call it survivability capital in this time. And we really need to continue to figure out a way that either we're going to get enough capital into the market to support these women to sustain themselves over time until the market reopens fully, or to really be able to help them restart, even if they close their doors when the economy opens back up. These are all very critical topics, and we shouldn't take them lightly.
I want to pick up on that point a little bit, Del. We heard in the previous panel Lisa's story about going into a bank and the various ways that she was deterred from getting a business account. And then we hear, as capital starts to flow through the PPP, that those folks with a business account are the ones that the big banks are going to target for this money. So talk a little bit about how you feel in terms of how that played out. Like, what's the impact of those types of my understanding is part of what happened is things moved so fast, banks made decisions, and the SBA was not clear and did not require them to target those that were most impacted. So given that all that played out, we ended up with what is in effect a racist and sexist policy and practice. So tell me a little bit about that. What does that look like in your world, and how do we change it going forward?
Yeah, well, first, I suppose I should make the disclaimer that these views represent my own and not necessarily the views of the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City nor the Federal Reserve System.
I forget.
So you're right. First of all, a lot of banks don't like to lend to small businesses under a certain size, regardless. The risk is high, the profitability is low, they're highly regulated, therefore they're risk averse. There's a lot of things that go into it, and so. You're starting at banks usually like to lend to bigger businesses anyway, businesses with loans of $1 million, because it's easier to lend $1 million. It's as easy to lend $1 million as it is to lend 10. Well, I'm actually doing that in reverse. It's easier to lend $1 million than it is to lend $10,000 loans, right? Mm-hmm. So you have that factor in play. Underwriting is often difficult. A lot of big banks try to centralize it, et cetera. So there's already a bias towards bigger lending because it's logical based upon the context in which banks, lend in the first place. So now you get into how that logic disproportionately harms minorities and women-owned firms, which are smaller, oftentimes have less, collateral. So in the normal marketplace, then it becomes, okay, the access to capital is diminished just because of that reason alone, the structure of the traditional banking industry. Now you take that same logic and you apply it into the COVID crisis, which means that a lot of these women didn't have, a big business relationship anyway. They had smaller firms in many instances because they couldn't access capital to grow and scale in the first place. And now you impose a system where banks want to lend to the bigger lenders and their customers that are bigger customers in the first place. And you see what happened. It's broken in the marketplace in regard to supporting those that are most vulnerable. So to fix it, what you have to do is either you have to incentivize the financial institutions to be able to lend to these loans with the same level of risk, but the same reward, which is going to be difficult. Or you have to really begin to support alternative capital institutions and figure out ways to get them funded so that they can in turn fund these small women and minority-owned businesses in a more responsible way. Again, that's just my opinion, though.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for clarifying. So let's hold on to that thought, Del. We're going to come back to it when we talk about policy. Elaine, I wanted to ask you if you could just take us down to the ground, take us to the community level. Think about all those women-owned businesses that you've been working with. Specifically, think of businesses owned by women of color, by Black women that we know are really hurting right now just because of the lack of customers. So talk to us about we're moving into how is COVID really affecting women-owned businesses? What does that look like? What are the issues they're facing, and what do they need? What do those small businesses need right now?
That's such a great question, and I'll be echoing a lot of the points that Del made, which is that what we're seeing is a few different things. One, there's psychological damage and historical trauma, and Nellie talked a little bit about that in her comments. I spoke to a couple women entrepreneurs, women of color, who I for sure thought that they had applied for PPP. These were college-educated women. They were very capable. They had really great businesses, and we've been offering free office hours and helping people like Nellie, webinars on helping walk people through the PPP programs and forgiveness. And I was shocked that these businesses hadn't applied. I'm like, you're ideally who it's for, but because what they heard on the news of Ruth Chris getting millions of dollars, they were just like, oh, it's not for me. And I'm like, yes, it absolutely is for you. And I have a personal connection. I'm going to have you talk to somebody today, and we're going to get you. We're going to get you going. So me, in a collaboration with one of our local community development financial institutes, were able to push just between her and I $10 million of PPP funds out the door that I don't think would have happened had we not done personal outreach. I actually hired somebody, one of my former student staffers. I hired them back specifically. Their whole job was to call every single entrepreneur in our database. That was her whole job, was to call them and find out if they were applying for PPP and if they needed help, and to schedule office hours with us. I think the other thing that's happening is they don't know how to pivot or realign the business. So what does it mean they didn't even realize or understand, like if they have a body butter company, hey, did you know you could use Venmo to be paid? You could drop it off at their door, at your customer's door, and be paid immediately through Venmo or Cash App or Zelle. And they didn't even know that that was an option. We talked about, them partnering with Grubhub to be a delivery service, or one of the other on-demand delivery services, Postmates, and they didn't even know that these things were optioned in. So part of it is that part. And the other part is getting their back office together. So what we've been telling them, very similar to what the previous comments were, is like, this is a quiet time for you to get the crap done that you probably should have been doing that you haven't done. So getting your back office in order, getting your hiring that bookkeeper, or signing up for QuickBooks or Bench or whatever your financial system is, getting a CRM system, getting your marketing plan in place, because if you're a product-based business, hey, we've got the holiday season. I said, there are a lot of people still at work. We have Target, we have Best Buy, we have Allianz, we have more Fortune 500 companies here in Minnesota. They're all working. So all of their people need products and services. So this is a time for you to be able to get yourself together so you can make an on-ramp for yourself to survive and thrive after this.
Yeah. Very helpful. Del, I just want to ask you to just elaborate a little bit on what you're seeing out there, and talk specifically about how, the impact on businesses is affecting communities that they serve.
Yeah, no, she hit the nail on the head. Everything that she references is exactly what we're hearing. And the one thing that I would even go further to say is the level of uncertainty in terms of communication about these situations. Uncertainty, makes people usually scared, usually makes them increasingly risk averse because they have no ability to make strategic decisions. And so, in a lot of conversations that I had with organizations that are working with women entrepreneurs, and specifically Black entrepreneurs, is that the level of uncertainty is so high that even the ability to plan your next step is very difficult. And so you have a lot of, and I'm so glad she brought up the issue of, historical trauma and discrimination, and issues of the fact that even when you look at like some of the reports that we've written from our small business credit survey, women are much more likely to report being discouraged borrowers, which means they're not even trying to go get a loan in good times. And now you have this stress in the marketplace and the uncertainty around how to access these products and all of these other things. So you have this scenario that we painted this a large group of borrowers, entrepreneurs, in a box because of the way that we've treated them prior to COVID. Now we're trying to rapidly solve a problem that is, like I think somebody in the last panel said 100, what did she say, like 10,000 years in the making or whatever, right. And it's all coming together. I have to say this. I mean, I don't think most people who are watching this realize that it wasn't even until the 80s that women could borrow money without the signature of their husband. So we're not talking about a long, lead time of where this is just a normal thing that women do. They get up, they start a firm, they go and try to access credit, and then they grow their business from there. So we're dealing with the legacy of cultural and gender-based discrimination that, we're seeing now. But in spite of that, women are doing phenomenal things around entrepreneurship. Women as a whole are growing faster than men in entrepreneurship. Black women are growing faster than everybody else, but we don't have the systems to support them. So when we circle back to your particular question, it's really difficult to determine, what is actually going to happen in communities of women entrepreneurs or women entrepreneurs, and the impact that they're going to have on their community based upon COVID. I mean, we just saw a report by Facebook that put it out that said an estimated 30% of all businesses have closed. And this was a survey sample of 86,000 people Facebook did, and that in certain industries is as high as 50%. My hypothesis is because of the weakness, financial weakness and infrastructure weaknesses of a lot of smaller firms, women firms included, is that the rate is going to be higher than that 30% on average. But there is a silver lining, because a lot of these businesses were very small because they were under-resourced in many instances. The ability to get back on should actually be to a degree easier. My hope is that, as we begin to support these women during the recovery, that we were really encouraged. A lot of what we've heard before, focus on business infrastructure, focus on tech enabling, your business, not necessarily becoming a tech business, but tech enabling. The innovation around, really pursuing your market versus just maybe your traditional market if you were pursuing that. All of these different things, we have a tremendous opportunity to really pick up our level of support for women-based entrepreneurs, for women entrepreneurs, and really help usher them, the whole cohort of women into, a new millennium and a new way of doing business that we know is coming across the world. And a lot of businesses have been hesitant to, because you've all heard the saying that a lot of times we want more women to begin to work on the business versus working in the business. So how do you become a CEO versus the one that's doing everything? These are the things that we have to put now into the infrastructure and demand it from a policy perspective.
Yeah. And Heather, I just want to add another really, really important point of this is what we found in our research working with particularly women entrepreneurs and what COVID has done. So what we found was 60% of our women entrepreneurs have a day job. So they're building a business while working a full-time job. Yeah. And we know that they're disproportionately displaced from their job. And we know that 60% of that 60% have either a child at home that they have to care for or an aging adult, and sometimes both. So when we talk about how this has impacted them, it's not just impacting their business, it is impacting every single aspect of their life, because they're having to homeschool their children, they're still trying to maintain the business, and they're still trying to maintain the responsibilities of their job. So it's really, I'm very concerned at the lack of mental health resources that are being made available, because that is going to be a huge part of it. And when we talk about how are they being impacted and what's going to happen in the future, we don't know, because that's such a big piece that is missing.
Great. I hear the questions coming in, so I'm just going to ask you all one last round of questions, and then we'll move to our audience. On your point, Elaine, and also Del, you just brought up policy. So let's pivot a little bit. Let's envision a future where women and women of color, specifically owned businesses, are thriving, they're prospering. What kind of policies, national, state, local, do we need in place to make sure that they can not only recover from this crisis, but really thrive in the years ahead? So let me turn to you, Elaine. Give us your insights, your wisdom on that.
Oh, I wanted to hear from Del, but I have a couple of two that I think are really top ones. One is I think we need to specifically call out Black and brown people, Indigenous people, women of color, because what often gets conflated is people of color and women, which is often code for white women. It's not to say that white women have not been disenfranchised, but when we look at, by ethnic group, white women are still way ahead of Black and Indigenous women. So I think making these very specific call outs is very, very important. And it's something that we're wrestling with here in the state of Minnesota. I think the other thing, to Del's earlier point about new types of capital and alternative capital, I think that we need Wyoming, Utah, and Arizona have adopted a fintech policy sandbox. And I'm also part of the Boston Impact Initiative Fellowship, which is looking at building alternative capital funds. We need sandboxes to find creativity and innovation, because we know that the current financial services sector has a lot of work to do in helping these types of entrepreneurs get capital and the type of capital they need in the way that they need it. So we need some outside of the box innovative approaches to providing capital, but we need the space to do that. And under the current regulations, it doesn't allow for that creativity to even to happen, and or it's cost prohibitive. So I think adopting fintech policy sandbox across the nation, I think will really help to inspire folks like me. And I think we heard from Margaret from Goldman Sachs is, this urban investment group is what inspired her. So it's like looking for these new opportunities to actually figure out how can we undo some of the setup, the way that the financial services sector is set up, which doesn't favor us, to make it more pliable and bendable so that it works for everybody.
Yeah. And let me just dig a little deeper, because you talked about the need to center women of color. And we're seeing that so critical, using the example of the PPP and how that didn't happen at the beginning. While there are a number of banks and financial institutions, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan Chase, Citigroup, that are using private funds to target women and women of color, it's a lot harder when we come to public sector funding. What do we need to do to make sure that policies that we're pushing for do target, do disproportionately benefit women of color, and that they center women of color? How do we do that?
So I think there's two parts to that. First part, I totally admire a lot of these large financial institutions for doing these initiatives. But if you dig a little bit deeper, you'll see that the money is actually being managed by not people who look like me. So it's not just enough for you to launch a program. You need to have people who are managing the program who understand what's happening on the ground in those communities, and that they're developing those partnerships with organizations like ours, the local community development financial institutions, and other social organizations that are on the ground doing the work, and that those organizations are paid to do that work. A lot of times people approach us, we're a consulting firm, and our technical assistance is for free, and our consulting pays for that. But when people want to partner for us, that is still a draw on our time. And we're nonprofit. I think that's another big distinction. A lot of service providers are coming up the ranks that are not nonprofits. And if we don't think outside of the box of like, how do we move our money to infrastructure, that it may not look like a nonprofit, and us putting ourselves or putting our investment into infrastructure to not just be through a nonprofit organization. I think the other part of it, as far as the policy stand, there's a lot of parts of it. So part of this is you can do this by saying, what do we know about Black women or brown women owned businesses? We know that they have less than 5 employees. We know that they are solopreneurs and maybe sole proprietorships. In Minnesota, we've gotten rid of the sole proprietor as an entity structure. So now you've actually made invisible all of these Black and brown women entrepreneurs with the stroke of a pen. So it's things like that where we have to examine the policy, and we're happy to help folks understand that and look at that, but understand how your policy is actually undermining your diversity, equity, inclusion goals as a city or state or region.
Great. Thank you so much. That was so helpful. Del, I'm going to move to you. I know you're representing yourself and not the Fed, but share with me your thoughts on the policy questions, if you're comfortable with that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, my daughter's cat is desperately trying to get some FaceTime on the camera, but I've been keeping them at bay.
Me too.
But yeah, it's a great question. I think we need to let banks be banks and let them do bank things, and recognize that banks do not necessarily effectively serve the needs of startup entrepreneurs and many other type of entrepreneurs, and be okay with that. So that's point one, understanding the role of banks in the capital stack, and then almost moving them to the side. So once you move them to the side, then you're left with the question of where are the huge gaps that are still in the marketplace that need to be served. And, you know, a lot of that is different forms of underwriting standards, different forms of capitalization, recognizing that all businesses are not created equal by type or by size or even ambition, and developing capital structures, to do that. And this could range from a lot of different things, like really empowering equity-based crowdfunding on platforms and making sure that those are penetrating the marketplace. It could be, like you saw, we put out the Main Street One lending facility to backstop some of the SBA PPP loans, but doing more things like that, where we know that we're going to target these major facilities and policies towards entrepreneurship that reduce the risk of either an investor. So you could have a loan or a backstop, like an SBA type guarantee, using that just as a proxy for those type of deals, with other kinds of investment or lending, so that you can take higher risk. I've been arguing forever that the microfinance industry has got to stop underwriting these microfinance loans like banks do, and be happy with a 4% loan loss rate. No, you need to take more risk in the marketplace, but that has to be supported by the way that these microfinance organizations and CDFIs get their dollars. I would be okay with a 25% loan loss rate if you're doing what I would call a portfolio management strategy, where you're looking at the net production of the businesses that you lend to in terms of job creation and wealth versus just loan loss, which is what a lot of these organizations end up doing. So, there's a lot of different ways. Here's a way that, we don't even think about, but is very powerful. Creating more ESOPs, where we create more employee-owned, plans where a lot of employees can come together with small dollar capital investments and own the company themselves. Like we really need to begin to start thinking out of the box, because what we're doing is clearly not working. It's clearly, in my opinion, is harming the long-run growth of the national economy. It's re-entrenching the wealth gap, and ultimately, it's keeping in place a lot of the segregated policies that happened in the past and the gender-based inequities that have happened in the past. And again, the good thing about, challenges like we're seeing with COVID is it gives us an opportunity to now step into that inflection point caused by the crisis and say, yo, this is not working. Let's now step back and innovate and figure out what we can do to work and create a new type of economy going forward. So one of the things I'll be very disappointed in personally, as someone who's been doing this stuff for 25 years in communities of color, is if we walk out of this crisis and literally nothing has changed. We say how bad everything is and how everything, wasn't working before. And then when the dust settles, we're back to business as usual. That would really, I might retire if that happens. But I know, we're not going to let that happen. So we got to keep working at it.
Yeah, we got to push that reset button, because business as usual wasn't working for a lot of folks. Great. I am so appreciative of this back and forth. I just wanted to lift up one thing you just said, Del, which is shared ownership. There are a lot of folks in our network that are working. Project Equity is one national group that's supporting the conversion of small businesses, especially in communities of color and businesses owned by women to try, and locally owned businesses to try to help convert those into ESOPs that are owned by folks in the community. And then we also have a lot of members in our network that are working on co-ops that have a long history in the South. So I encourage folks to be thinking about shared ownership strategies. So now I am going to move here to questions from our audience, and I'm going to start with one from Nicole and Donnie. She's asking, how do we prepare women to get ready to successfully apply for capital? I think we touched on it, but let's dig into that a little more. Lane, do you want to start?
I'll let Del start.
Okay, Del.
Okay. So one of the points that I did want to make in 2 seconds is that New York was going to offer Amazon about $3 billion in incentives to relocate their headquarters to New York. And we saw reports that Jeff Bezos, owner of Amazon, is potentially going to be the first trillionaire. Does anybody not see the contradiction of that? So imagine if we took the same energy of applying incentives based, they say estimated $60 to $70 billion every year flows through states for incentivizing the recruitment of these big firms, and apply those dollars to small businesses and creating equity across the ecosystem for small businesses of women and communities of color. Imagine that. I just wanted to put that out there. In terms of the readiness factor, when me and Rodney Sampson from Opportunity Hub wrote the Inclusive Ecosystem Building Guide, basically, the point that we made in that is that if you're trying to start supporting entrepreneurs at the time when they say they want to be an entrepreneur, you missed the boat. Like, we need to go back to K through 12 education, where we can start teaching people how to own what entrepreneurship is. We need to have better, educational institutions at the college and community level. Readiness should be more organic. Like, we're trying to force what should be a natural state on a lot of people. But when women are trying to get ready in particular, they need to start doing it now. Like the previous panel said, take this time to get your infrastructure in order, to prepare your readiness. There's a lot of local resources that in most communities are even regional or national. Some on this video right here, or this panel right here, some on the previous one and some on others, that you can reach out to and get help, putting your accounting together, putting your plans together, coming up with a strategic marketing plan. All of these things, we need to have our entrepreneurs in general take their craft seriously. That means a constant state of learning how to do it better. And that starts with them motivated to do it. But on the other side, the supply side, we need more institutions in the community that are culturally sensitive, that are gender sensitive, that are able to communicate effectively the information so that women don't feel like, hey, this is a gender-based deal and I'm going to go in and I'm not going to be comfortable. with it, but that really meets their needs, talks to their language, understands a particular situation. One other point I want to go back to that I believe Elaine said. One of the things that we have to understand is that, oftentimes as people of color, as women, we are coming into a unique environment and we're viewed differently in the marketplace. And that has a psychological effect. So this is why these safe spaces, these gender specific, these race specific, trainings, organizations, cultures, community locations are important, because it allows us to learn things without always having to feel like we're being judged, potentially discriminated against, or looked at differently because of race or gender.
Mm-hmm. Yep, really helpful. Okay, let's go to our next question. So this is a bit of a long one, but it's important, so I'm going to read it out. So one of the things that we're seeing is that it's not enough to get a PPP loan, an EIDL loan, or any other type of financial assistance. In order to stabilize and succeed in the long run, businesses need cash infusions and trusted guidance on how to make the necessary pivots to adjust to the new normal during and after COVID. How can we make sure that women, people of color, and small businesses generally get these more comprehensive supports that we really can revitalize Main Street? Are there exceptional models out there that could be scaled? Are there opportunities to partner among organizations within the local ecosystems? So
I'll be happy to jump on that one. I love that one because I think it really talks about the importance of ecosystems and infrastructure. So I had testified in front of our Minnesota State Senate and House of Representatives, and one of the things that I talked about, there was a big debate on not the stimulus package that the state was offering, but that the state was going to be going into debt to offer the stimulus package. And one of my comments in my testimony was, well, if we're going to go in debt, let's go into debt setting up the infrastructure so that we're able to survive and thrive the next one. Because I think somebody on this panel or the previous panel said it, and I believe it 100%, there's going to be another crisis. And actually the half-life of our crisis occurrences are speeding up. So if we think about 2008 was the last recession, and it's been 12 years, we can anticipate that the next crisis will come within the next 6 years. And what are we doing now to prepare for that, whatever it is, whether it be man-made or whether it be some other design disaster or another pandemic? And so we really, and this is even in good times, we don't want to pay for infrastructure. You can't take a picture next to infrastructure. You can't, it's not sexy. Everybody loves the roads until the roads are crumbling, and then everybody complains about their taxes going up to fix the roads or the schools or the libraries. But these things are essential. And I think to Dell's point, it is absolutely imperative that we have people who are culturally responsive and understand how to service these folks from different communities. And this includes rural communities, indigenous communities, to understand the psychology that the person is walking in the door with. Because if you don't know how to deal with that, you're not going to be of any use for them. If you can't understand what they're walking in the door with, then all the information that you're sharing with them is out the door. I have a friend of mine who is a local, now an entrepreneur, but was a TO provider who didn't have a lot of entrepreneur experience other than that from her family. And she now understands, she's like, I gave really bad advice. I really didn't give good advice. And now I understand how crazy some of the advice I was giving is because it wasn't really from that perspective and understanding the psychosis of what happens, not only just from a cultural standpoint, but even as a business owner, what are the heartaches and headaches that you're carrying with you? So I really think it's important and imperative to us for supporting infrastructure. Partnership, I think, is going to be the key name of the game going forward. And fortunate, we 100%, it's part of our values is doing partnerships, but partnerships are going to be the key. And I think one of the things that's overlooked in partnerships is, are you values aligned? Because your values alignment is what's going to say whether or not this partnership is going to work or not. And it gives you some kind of way to create accountability, especially if the partnership is across different races. So if there's a white organization that's partnering with a Black organization, and we know that not all people of color are for people of color. But as a white organization, your goal is you don't want to look or feel or sound racist. But if you have a bad actor and that organization is a POC-led organization, what recourse do you have? So when you can align your partnership from the set focal point of values, then you can say, you are operating outside of the values that we committed to upholding. And here's what I need you to do. And now it's not so much about like there's a racial issue, although that doesn't preclude it from coming up, but you can say, hey, we agreed that we were going to operate under these values. And I'm seeing that you're stepping outside of those values. But I 100% believe that partnership, policy, communications, and I think this cradle to grave, like really teaching this, because you need it. You need entrepreneurship, not just as an entrepreneur. We need entrepreneurship even if you're working in a company. We need people to think outside of the box. We need people to think innovatively, and that only comes through an entrepreneurial mindset. So it's not just about that we need more entrepreneurs and we need people learning about entrepreneurship in kindergarten, but we do need them to understand about innovation and thinking outside of the box and strategy and design thinking and to solve the problems that are going to be facing us in the future.
So great. Thank you, Elaine. Del, I know it was a while ago since I asked the question, but again, we're really looking at how can we make sure women, people of color get the comprehensive supports they need? And then are there exceptional models out there that could be scaled?
Yeah, no, I think Elaine must be my soul sister because she's hitting everything that, I talk about a lot in terms of inclusive ecosystem building and things of that nature. One of the things that I would even go a little higher in terms of values alignment is the values your municipal leaders have, your local political leaders have, because it makes a big difference if they put their foot down and say, we're going to be a very entrepreneurial driven community versus if they say, we're just going to support big firms. Because when you start with that paradigm of entrepreneurial support, it allows the entire community to vision cast and get around it. Too often we're putting the burden at the hyper local level to support entrepreneurship when it has to be at all levels of the game. But there's reasons why that often doesn't happen, but I just want to put that out there. And so then when we talk about, this issue of, placemaking and accessibility, I have a saying where I talk about just because something is available doesn't mean it's accessible. And accessibility means that a person can go there and feel comfortable and get the information and knowledge that they need while being comfortable in that location in which they're getting it. And oftentimes many of these spaces, especially in startup entrepreneurship communities, they're not. I mean, imagine a 55-year-old woman going into, location with 23 to 25-year-old predominantly young males drinking beer and talking about their startups. Like, that's not necessarily an accessible location for many demographic groups, even though it's an available location. So I like to approach it from a user experience design thinking perspective, which is kind of like Stephen Covey said, you begin with the end in mind. So if I know women are entrepreneurs, and I hate homogenizing them, so I'm not even going to do that, but let's say women entrepreneurs in a high growth tech industry that are seeking venture capital, right? So let's very tailor make that particular target group. Then what does that particular audience need, demographic entrepreneurs need, and how do we design specifically for that? What we're still trying to do is superimpose these high-level entrepreneurial designed support systems onto the marketplace versus stepping back and saying, if you're a woman in Minnesota in this community that's thinking like this, and there's a large group of you, how do we design specifically for you so that we maximize the efficiencies of education, training, and capital structure, right? We don't do that. And those are the things that I say we're going to have to begin to do if we really want to ensure that we're developing entrepreneurs of all races, ethnicities, gender types, ages, geographic locations. We have to invert it and start from the ground up instead of the top down. So those are some of the critical things that we have to begin to really, really think about, because this is a long-run economic issue, if you think about it, because we're having huge demographic changes. We're having economic structural shifts where we're hollowing out the middle skilled labor market. So you're seeing now a high-skilled labor market and low-skilled labor market. So high-wage jobs, low-wage jobs, and a middle gap. That gap has to be supported by entrepreneurs, because we can't ask corporations to continue to, try to serve everybody when in large part they're outsourcing a lot of their labor market to lower cost labor markets. So we got a lot of work to do, but we can do it.
That's awesome. I'm just going back to our questions here from the audience. So I'm happy we got this question because we can go back to it. Del, this is for you. What do you see as the biggest financial barriers for ESOPs and cooperatively run businesses? Why don't we see more of them? What are the challenges they're facing?
I think that's more of a cultural question than a structural question. So remember, America has a long history of touting the rugged individualism, even though by and large it's a lie. So, the concept of rugged individualism is that, somebody has this great idea and they just do whatever it takes to get it there. And oftentimes when we stick to that narrative, what happens is you ignore all of the support mechanisms that person has had in their life to be able to get there. Like this old saying, no man is an island, no great entrepreneur did it by themselves. They all had support structures, even if they provide the energy and the innovation, as the leader of that process. So when it gets to ESOPs, what we're really seeing is I think people don't really understand what they are. They don't really understand how they would benefit them, and then they don't understand how to structure them. So I think if we could begin to talk more about how that works in the marketplace, because one of the things we haven't talked about is the silver tsunami of entrepreneurship, where 80% of all baby boomer generations want to retire, but only 20% of them have an exit strategy. This is a tremendous opportunity for women in communities of color to become entrepreneurs by simply taking over the businesses that they work for in the first place, and figuring out those mechanisms. So I would argue that it's as much cultural as anything else. We've always said entrepreneurship is pretty much a solo or partner venture, that rugged individual, that exceptional leader, all of those things. But I think there's so many different ways that you can create, business structures that are more egalitarian, that support broader based businesses, that decentralize wealth. And we're just not being innovative enough and consistent enough in trying to put them out into the marketplace to get them done.
And I would just add to that, what we're seeing here in the Midwest is there's the other side of the cultural piece, which is that's been so far removed from the Black community, even though it's been deep rooted in the community. And we do see it with the African immigrant community. But the way that, and I love Project Equity, and they've come to Minnesota and they've worked with us on educating folks. But part of the challenge is that the information and how it's talked about and the way it's viewed is still a very white construct. So I think one of the things that has to happen in talking about ESOPs and cooperatives is to take strip a lot of that language out and lifting up what this looks like from an ethnic lens, as opposed to what we seem to look at is, okay, a white, food co-op, or I will just tell you here in Minnesota, 90% of the co-ops, if not 95% of the co-ops, are white-led. So there is this whole thing of, once again, it's not for me. I don't see people who look like me who are doing this. And because that part of our history has been stripped away, we don't have that in our education system. Nobody talks about the Black cooperative. Nobody talks about Black Wall Street. So when you are erased from history, and that's a double whammy on top of, now we want to create this more egalitarian business economy, but there's no connection to actually where it comes from and who were some of the pioneers of those concepts, those constructs.
Yeah. So one thing I would just add to the conversation is it would be great to bring Dr. Jessica Gordon-Nemhart out to talk to your folks, because she's written a book about the historical legacy of Black co-ops, and it's really inspiring. She's really inspiring. Del, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, so when I was writing a lot of the Black Women Startups Guide, and I did a lot of research on women entrepreneurship, and one of the things, and it was great because one of the things that I read was on a feminist orientation towards entrepreneurship. And in the research, and this may be too wonky, but I do think it circles back around, is one of the things they said is that women entrepreneurs are often evaluated from the lens of masculinity. And that to basically truly be supportive of women entrepreneurship, we need to allow it to be supported from women's lenses and not the male lens. And so when we immediately start imposing things like entrepreneurship is all about growth, this is an impactful narrative because it also applies to both women and minorities, because if I, as a minority, am pursuing entrepreneurship, as a Black male, I'm pursuing entrepreneurship, not just to take care of my family, but to also, support my community, that's a different orientation than growth only. I'm looking at it by a different lens and a different standard. And so I think we need to really delve into broader based research and conversations with women to help them self-define what successful entrepreneurship looks like to them, and not necessarily assume that because the dominant narrative throughout American history, which has been very male driven, is that you start a business so that you can make as much money as possible, is the correct one. It may end up being the correct one if we ask enough women, and that the consensus tends to be that way. You're never going to have homogeny. But if that becomes a consensus, then fine. But we can't just start by saying, because entrepreneurship is supposed to be this, and this is what we expect great entrepreneurs to do, that wasn't driven by a narrative that traditionally did not include women and communities of color and women of color and the intersections between them. So I think we need to go back to some of the fundamental conversations that we need to have around this and begin to build better structures based upon those conversations and that insight, versus just saying that Black women only get 0.02% of venture capital, therefore something's wrong. Well, Black women may want to do something different than get venture capital. I'm not saying they will, but I'm saying that they might, and that maybe we need to start by asking those that are seeking high growth firms what it is that they want to do and how they want to receive the capital, versus just saying they don't have venture, therefore it's bad.
Right.
And the other side of that is actually what we're finding is that people aren't even seeing them as high growth potential, right? So they're not being, the opportunity to think big isn't even put in front of them. It's like, oh, okay, if you just want to sell out of your garage, okay, that's fine, and I'm going to help you do that. No one talks to them about saying, oh, did you know that actually you could have your product in Target? And let's talk, is that of interest to you? And if it's of interest to you, then let's talk about a pathway there. No one's even going through the extra lens or the extra time to see, oh, I see a big market for you. Is that, to your point, Del, it's like, is that something that you want? And it's like, 9 times out of 10, they're like, I haven't even, oh, wow, that's actually doable. Yes, it's doable, and there's programs for you, and we're going to walk you through how to get that done.
Great.
Yeah,
Del,
we forgot to talk about that.
Oh, Del, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, we talked about that on our pre-call. The socialization factor,
Right.
So the socialization factor is usually when you're a women-owned entrepreneur, the first thing that they do when you say that is steer you into the microbusiness or business plan class, right? And when you say you want to be a high growth entrepreneur, which often is tech related, they don't steer you down the microbusiness path. They steer you into the high growth venture capital path, accelerator, instead of a business plan, you're doing a business model canvas, doing an MVP, all of these different kind of things. And so a lot of women and minorities are literally socialized out of high growth entrepreneurship, not because they don't have the potential. If you believe, Gallup's research, they say across gender, ethnicity, and race and geography, the same percentage of super high growth potential business owners are in each group. And so if we're not seeing that execute, in reality, then basically we know it's a systemic discrimination factor, not a purely entrepreneurial talent factor that is reducing the number of high growth Black and women-owned firms in the marketplace. These are things that we need to step back and grapple with it, and not just assume that all the answers were pre-existing. If we want to talk about entrepreneurship, we need to be entrepreneurial ourselves, which means we look at a challenge and we come up with creative solutions to solve them, instead of just saying we need more of X, Y, and Z because we didn't have it in the past.
And testing that solution, and as we've talked about in the previous panel, of like fast iteration, right? So rapid iteration. It's like, oh, that didn't work. Let's not keep doing the program for 5 years only to find out that it's not working. Like, let's prototype this, get it out there, test it. If it doesn't seem like it's working, tweak it, put it back out there again. This whole rapid iteration, even amongst, I think, our ecosystem, is still grappling with. And I think that's one of the challenges, is when organizations are nonprofit, because of the structure of philanthropy, it doesn't allow you that opportunity to iterate quickly. You've got to wait for the new grant. You've got to talk to your program officer. And so that's why I think we're starting to see more business service providers be for-profits, benefit corporations, cooperatives, alternative models than nonprofit, because I think even the nonprofits are stranglehold by just the nature of how philanthropy works.
Amazing. I could spend all day talking to the two of you, and I'm going to be calling you right after this session. So thank you. Thank you. This has been such a great session. So I am getting a message from AEO right now saying that it's giveaway time. So they're giving away an iPad. And for folks, if you want to get in the mix, you need to get on the VIP platform. And then you can register for it through AEO Works and select conference. So I understand that the winner is actually being announced right now in the chat. So if you glance at the chat, we should hear it. And they said it's coming in. The winner is Tamala Handy. So congratulations, Tamala. I'm glad I got to do the giveaway, be a talk show host. So anyway, you guys, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it. AEO, this has been amazing. And then now I'm going to turn it back to Corey. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather, and all of our amazing speakers for having that incredible conversation focused on women, wealth, and entrepreneurship. Join us next week on June 2nd as we kick off a conversation on equitable entrepreneurship. So mark your calendars. Haven't had the chance to register? Don't forget to go to aeoworks.org. After all, next week there's an exciting new giveaway that you'll want to take part in. And connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and keep the conversation going by using the hashtag #RevitalizeMainStreet. Until next time, I'm Corey Briscoe, and you're watching AEO's 2020 Digital Conference. Remember this question: what will you do to help small businesses?